Party 13, let's suit up for adventure.
They're the only ones that can save the world.
What?
A fantasy world of magic, monsters, and heroes.
Yeah, hello? Where is that voice coming from?
Heroes like Andar Patron, the star of our story.
Yeah, that's me, but what are you talking about?
Sorry. We're in a promo for your podcast. Did nobody tell you?
What?
Your podcast. Have Spellbook Will Travel?
Have Spellbook?
It's a scripted fantasy comedy audio drama based on the creator's experiences playing tabletop games.
To be honest, that sounds pretty boring.
Well, it's hilarious. And heartwarming. And great. Super great.
Whatever you say, buddy.
Have Spellbook Will Travel on the Don't Split the Podcast network. Start the adventure at havespellbook.com or wherever podcasts are available for free.
This is Tabletop Babble. I'm James Introcaso. Today on the show, we've got Sage Stafford, Phil Collins, and Rohit Sodhia talking about how to handle real-world heavy issues in gaming. So I want to let everybody know up front, right, that this is going to cover some real-world heavy issues. We don't get too deep into them, but we do make mention of them. So if it's the kind of thing you don't want to hear, or you have young kids, or you're a more sensitive listener, feel free to skip this one and catch us on the next one. It's a really, really good conversation because not only do we cover, how to handle, how to protect yourself and your players at the table, we also cover why it might be good to use real-world heavy themes at your table. So our advice isn't to necessarily avoid it. Our advice is about how to work it in, why to work it in, how to do things tastefully, how to do things that are right for your group. And every group is different. Anyway, I'm getting too much into that conversation now. So why don't we join some people to talk about it? Hello, everyone. Now I am here with three amazing gamers and just people that I really love from the bottom of my heart. Sage Stafford is here with us. Sage, for those people who don't know you, and they should, let them know who you are and what you do in the world of tabletop role-playing games.
Hello, everyone. I am a venture maiden. I play Cara Brynhilda, the infamous barbarian. On the Don't Split the Podcast network. I've been playing D&D for 4 years, both as a player and as a dungeon master, and I've also started venturing into White Wolf gaming systems and have been really hitting it hard with Mage the Ascension.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah, we got to have you on to talk about White Wolf sometime. People go gaga for that system, so we will definitely talk about that. Also with us today is Phil Collins. Phil, tell the people who you are and what you do in the world of tabletop role-playing games.
I'm a long-time gamer. I've been gaming for about 40 years. I'm also the director of board gaming at DragonCon. So I end up doing some tangential stuff with other people at DragonCon, and I do a panel every year about various gaming topics at DragonCon. So that's my bona fides.
That's awesome. DragonCon is an amazing convention.
I've always wanted to go.
Oh, you've got to go. It's so much fun. It's It's huge. It's lovely. It's welcoming.
It's nerdy gras.
It is nerdy gras. It's nerdy gras.
That's what I've heard.
And finally joining us is the man, the myth, the legend, Rohit Sodhia. Rohit, welcome to Tabletop Babble. Let the people out there know who you are and what you do in the world of tabletop gaming.
That is a hell of an intro to live up to. So I'm Rohit Sodhia. I am the man behind Gamers Plane, a play-by-post website, as well as smatterings helping a whole bunch of different groups get things done, digital help here and there, working with Lawful Good Gaming right now, a group doing tabletop gaming for charity. So that's currently my current big side project.
Wow. What could be better than tabletop gaming and helping out great causes? Nothing. So we are going to jump right into it. Sage, you brought this topic. It's how do we handle serious, real-world issues at the table? And so just to get started, and just so we can sort of frame this issue in people's minds, I'd love to talk about what some of the serious real-world issues people maybe have faced at their table, possibly in a published adventure, in a homebrew game, whatever it may be. I know it varies, right? Some people are triggered by different things, and I should mention up top, right, that we're going to talk about some really serious stuff in this podcast. So if you're listening with young people, or if you have sensitive ears around you, maybe this is one you want to save or want to skip, and that's totally fine. We will not be offended. So Sage, let's start with you. What do you think are some serious real-world topics that you've faced at the gaming table?
Celeste and a couple of my friends and I were currently going through Curse of Strahd, which is a world full of darkness. And, we had just gotten to the part where we had to rescue Arena. We had to rescue Arena from the governor's mansion in Valaki, and she was just totally battered and beaten and raped and locked up in Ivan's room.
Oh, gotcha.
And dealing with a really intense and heavy scene like that. In my game that I run, the mage game that I run, it takes place in Hawaii, and so it focuses hugely around indigenous rights and activism.
Oh yeah. Sure.
Various axes of oppression, the taking of land from native peoples, and I don't know. We've faced all kinds of things at our table.
Sure. No, I mean, I think those are some great real world issues that we see people face, and a lot of times, I think because we want to show the bad guy or bad person, right, is a bad person, we deal with some of these topics. I am sorry I laughed when you said Hawaii. I thought it was going to be and so that's very light and different than Curse of Strahd.
Yes. It's very shiny and vibrant, but
yes,
there is a darkness underneath.
For sure. Phil, what about you? You've racked up
exactly
40 years in gaming. I'm sure you have seen some crazy topics at some of your tables sometimes. So what are some things you've faced that you feel are some deep, serious, real-world issues?
There's a lot of casual racism and sexism in some of the products that are out there. A lot of people who've been gaming for a while really don't buy into it. They don't, it never happened to me, so it didn't happen. To me, I game to have fun. I try to take a lot of it in stride, but, it's one of those things that, it just keeps getting pounded over and over and over and over. And it's just a little casual racism here, a little casual sexism there. And, I have friends who are other people of color. I have other people who are trans. I have other people who are non-binary, whatever. And they're not taken seriously at the table. A lot of it has to do with people feeling welcome at the table. We get a lot, I see a lot of that. And, I look back on my history as a gamer and, I wonder sometimes, am I perpetuating this? I try not to. I hope I'm not. But a lot of that is what we see. And more recently, we're beginning to see people try to bring their politics to the table.
Sure. Yeah.
And, it doesn't take but one comment to derail a game.
That is so true.
That is definitely true. That's definitely true. You do see a lot of that, and I think people, particularly sometimes in published stuff or whatever, want to make a statement or want to make a bad person a super duper bad person.
Yes.
And, I think we'll talk a little bit later, how do we go about those things? How do we tackle some real world themes in a tasteful way, in an impactful way that doesn't feel like a joke and doesn't feel like we're making fun of somebody. It makes people feel welcome, right? Because that's a big problem, and we should also talk about when to avoid that kind of stuff altogether, right? But let's turn to Rohit. Rohit, what are some real world themes you have dealt with at your tables?
I think especially the way Phil phrased it, racism, I think, is what I notice the most, at least. Being Indian, I don't know if it's more apparent to me or I just pick up on things that might not be obvious to other people. There's a line between being thematic and being racist, I think. You can play a character, as their race, and a lot of times when people do a cheesy Indian accent or Chinese accent or do something very stereotypical, I think it's funny. Like, if there's a line there, but then there's a point when you take that same humor and you keep pushing it and you push it, and that's when it crosses the line, in my opinion, from being funny, a joke, to being racist, actually picking on a culture, actually picking on a person. And it becomes very tough. Sexism is definitely something interesting because a lot of gaming tables are all guys. And so I see a lot of guys wanting to play female characters, I think in part to try to understand better or to show they're okay with something. And a lot of them have trouble finding that same line. Where am I going from being a female character to being a female stereotype? Mm-hmm. And that is also a very difficult line to draw.
It's like salt. A little salt in your food is great, but if you dump the whole bottle in there, if you go over the top with it, it's kind of offensive.
Mm-hmm. That's so true. And I think the line, right, we've been talking about over the line, what's over the line, like it's different for everybody. I think playing in a convention where you're not sure, or people aren't necessarily comfortable with everybody at the table because you're strangers, the line may be in a different place where if you're with your home group, you know each other well, when you're tackling these sort of real world themes. One thing that I see come up a lot is slavery, and I think you were saying indigenous peoples, Sage, those themes of like kind of colonialization, right, come up a lot at the table. I think people almost forget that like this is kind of a heavy real world issue that people are still doing today. And so, I think it's like, how do you handle those things so that you can tell a compelling story? Maybe you can even touch a little bit of that real world sensitivity to like get the emotion out of your players. But then at the same time, Phil, you're absolutely right. We're here to play a game. We're here to have fun. If we wanted to be miserable, we would all go back to work. So, how do we find that line, and how do we set expectations? Do you think that if you're going to tackle a lot of real world heavy themes, it's important to have a conversation beforehand? At least if you don't know the group that well, probably. Like, when something comes up, Sage, how do you tackle a real world theme that you're not sure everybody at your table is going to be okay with?
Well, I really start with, when I start a campaign, I start with the session 0, and I let people know, like, hey, this is going to be, like, the main theme of the campaign. Build up your characters, and we'll figure out how we'll fit into it, but these are going to be the 3 main topics that I'm going to be focusing on, and, these are the things that inspire me and drive me and, keep me going day to day of fighting for these things, and it's important for me to be able to express this with all of you. And so reaching out to my players, being like, if there's a point where you feel uncomfortable or where you're not sure how to handle a situation, like, tell me now, speak up later, pull me aside later, but really trying to make that line of communication as open as possible. And also in sensing how people are feeling at the table. Like, if you're a DM and you don't notice that everyone is really uncomfortable, you're doing something wrong. Being able to pick up on people's vibes. And I think when you are, and knowing that you're going to go into an intense scene, giving people a 5-minute break, I think really helps as well, to help everyone clear their heads and get into the right space and be ready and open for that.
I think that's great advice. Keeping the lines of communication open in your home game are huge, so that people feel comfortable coming to you and saying, wow, that was intense. Like, and I think it also helps people feel more comfortable when those things come up, because they know that, like, I trust my DM, and I know that if we get into a situation where I am not having fun anymore, that I'll be able to say so. And so, like, I'm willing to follow you down this rabbit hole if you're willing to turn around when I say, like, it's enough. And I think that builds some great trust, and then even lets you tell high stakes stories in some other ways, right? It makes people more comfortable taking, the big leaps with their character and character development and stuff, which is great too. Phil, what about you? Like, what do you do to prepare people if you have a heavy theme in a game?
I spent a number of years playing a campaign called Living Death. Whoa. And Living Death was a horror campaign. It was based on second edition D&D, but it was set in the late 1800s. So it's right after the Civil War when a lot of this stuff is going on. I was playing a black army officer. And I had to realize there was a group of people I could play this character the way I envisioned him because I knew these people. These people were friends of mine. They were, I played with them. They got me into playing Living Death. I could play them one way. And I understood that, I'm traveling around the United States as a black man in late 19th century. There's not a lot of places I can go and be the forthright guy that I am. And, there were a lot of, N-word this, N-word that thrown out, but we knew how to handle it because it's a group of people I know. Mm-hmm. I couldn't play that character the exact same way when I was playing Living Death at, say, Origins. Sure. I could go to Origins and, there were people who did not realize when I played the character at Origins that my character was actually black. I didn't say I wasn't black, but I'm playing the game, but I'm playing a black army officer who has a gun who points it at white people and shoots them in the head. That's what I did because it's, again, horror theme game. I'm role playing. Sure. Yeah. But it's one of those things you have to learn. You have to tone it down. It's very important. It's a role playing game, but you got to know your audience. This is kind of weird, but it's kind of like fetish play. You got to know what you're doing with who you're doing it with. And then after, if it gets too intense, you got to take a break, use your safe word, right. And afterwards have a little aftercare. We need to hug it out afterwards. And a lot of people, especially in public gaming, some people just haven't learned that you can't do that. It's all about knowing your audience. There are words I use around my friends I don't use in public. Mm-hmm. I think we're all like that. Yeah. And I think that's one of those things you have to, keep in mind when you're playing.
You're absolutely right. The convention and the home setting are so different. The same way if you were having dinner with your friends at home, you might feel comfortable like being loud and raucous. But if you're out at a nice restaurant, you're not necessarily...
I'm always loud and raucous.
Right? But if you're out at a restaurant with strangers, you maybe are going to be a little more polite at first as you get to know everybody because you want everybody to be comfortable.
It's like dating.
Yeah. That is absolutely true. It is like dating. And the safe word thing, I've seen at conventions when people play games like Monster Hearts, right? Or that kind of thing. People use this technique known as the X card, where they just draw an X on an index card, and if somebody's uncomfortable, they don't have to say anything. All they need to do is touch this card that's in the center of the table, and the game master moves on. Is like, okay, cool, we're done with that, and now we're moving on as a way to like, hey, maybe Monster Hearts wants to sell copies of their game, right? So like,
and a lot of it might be a maturity thing because I've seen, I pay attention to gamers because these are my people, and I like hearing people of all ages talk about the games they played in, and sometimes when you hear some of the younger gamers, people who are considerably younger than I am playing. They don't get it that one, you got to know your audience, and they sometimes they tend to relish they relish the gore, they relish the ick factor, and a lot of times they don't. I try not to ascribe any kind of ulterior motive to anybody, but sometimes people just don't realize that they're being offensive. I think one of the most important things we can do as gamers or as people in general. If you're offended, speak up, say something. I know sometimes it's not easy, but you got to let people know. And on the flip side, you got to look out for that. You got to look out for when you might be offending somebody. It might be something very simple. Like Rohit was just saying, he gets it with people with the Indian accent. We all get it, but you got to know, okay, I've crossed the line.
Yeah, Rohit, what do you think? Like, how do you determine where the line is? How do you sort of prepare your players for tackling some more serious real world issues?
Yeah, well, all my gaming is actually at cons right now, so I actually see it from the other perspective too. In that when a stranger comes up and is doing something, we brought up a lot of those topics. I was in a game recently where it was set adults only in the brochure, and when we came down, especially when the game is adults only, I expect an X card these days. I'm at a point where that just seems to be a standard for any game that isn't all ages friendly.
Right.
And I was a little surprised that this GM didn't throw down an X card, and I noticed. So the GM was female. Mm-hmm. She was playing a female NPC who was flirting with my character to get something out of him. And, I kind of play off of other people's vibes. If she's willing to play along with it, I'll see how far she's willing to go. And, I'll have fun. I'll have a good time with it. But I could see other players at the table felt weird. It was kind of a weird, flirty, kind of almost not safe for public kind of thing. And I kind of maybe we should throw down an X card because I saw a couple of the players getting a little weirded out, and I think that was the first thing is make sure you know your crowd. I think if you're running a game at a convention, you have an extra onus to make sure you're watching your crowd. If you don't feel comfortable or if you're not sure about touchy topics, make sure you're paying attention to what's going on around you because not everyone is into that. Not everyone knows what's coming up. You know your storyline. No one else does. And I think it's very important that people are very self-aware about what they're bringing to a table. Like Phil pointed out, you're strangers. It's dating. There's no way in the world I'm going on a first date with someone, and the first topic I bring up is super gore. I mean, I guess unless we met over some big horror movie. Otherwise, you got to watch your crowd. You got to understand the crowd, and you have to be careful about where it goes. And like you said, the line is weird. A lot of people are very careful around me because I'm Indian. They're like, oh, he's going to have a very short distance to go. But I kind of take it as have fun with it and try not to be offensive. And I've had people ask me, am I pushing this too far? And I'm like, no, you're fine. Or, yeah, maybe tone it down a little bit. And I think that's a very good way of doing it. If you're not sure, ask. Just like Phil pointed out, if you're on the other end and you're the one being offended, bring it up. Gamers, we get to meet some of the most diverse crowds of any group of people, I guess is the best way to put it. And so we have the opportunity to learn from each other. I've definitely been offensive, I know, and I've tried to learn from those experiences. And likewise, I hope that anytime I'm at a table with someone, we're all learning and picking up something there.
Yeah.
Yeah. Definitely to add on to that, one time I was playing with someone, she was deaf and she had an interpreter. So her interpreter would sign and we would role play and it was going really well. And at one point, I didn't even think about it, but we were coming up with a plan of attack. And at the end of it, I was like, all right, sounds good to me. And then, her interpreter replied back I wouldn't, replied back for her, I wouldn't know that. Oh, and, sure. It's just such a simple thing that you just say. And I was just blushing so hard and just feeling just so oh my God, that was such a stupid slip. But, in those moments where you mess up, you have to be you got to own it. You just be you know what? And I'm sorry. I didn't think about that.
The real point is you weren't trying to be offensive. And I don't,
yeah.
Do you think that she took offense at it?
No, and, we played it off and we laughed about it.
Exactly.
And, but, the thing is, whenever, someone throws it at you, being hey, watch yourself, and be okay.
I'm sorry. It's one of those things you have to understand when it's time to be offended as well. An inadvertent thing like you did sounds good to me. That you weren't trying to be offensive. You were talking, but and they know when they cross the line. You just got to remember, you got to speak up for yourself.
Hey, everybody! Just wanted to take a quick break to let you know about Loot Crate, the sponsor for this episode of Tabletop Babble. You can save 10% on any new Loot Crate subscription at trylootcrate.com/DSPN. That's trylootcrate.com/DSPN. Loot Crate is a monthly box you get delivered to your door. It's a gift from you to you of awesome nerd and genre stuff. We're talking t-shirts, vinyl pop figures, all kinds of cool stuff. And what you do is you go, you sign up, you forget that you did it, and then boom, you surprise yourself. It's pretty awesome. Go to trylootcrate.com/DSPN to get 10% off your order of Loot Crate. You know, it's funny. I think we've got like tons of great stuff here, and I would love to talk about, you know, we keep making this dating analogy, like, when do you know it's time to take your relationship to the next level with your players? But what I do want to hit up before we get to there is kind of what the benefits of bringing real world issues into your game are, right? Because we're talking a lot about like how to protect your players, how to protect yourself, how to keep your communication open, which I think is all very, very good advice. But then it almost begs the question of like, well, why? Like, why not just stick to killing, you know, ogres and orcs? Because apparently stabbing things over and over again isn't offensive.
It's like a parable. You know, you use a game to deal with the topic that's coming up in real life. I see that happening a lot. We've had the thing with police shootings. I've seen, I cannot remember the name of the game, but it was a Pathfinder module I played that someone used the real world thing about police shootings, and they brought it over into a Pathfinder game. It made people think. And if you're using gaming for something like that, that's not a bad experience.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, particularly a role-playing game where you can put yourself maybe into a position you're not in real life, right? Like me, born in New Jersey to a middle-class white family, like been a straight white guy in the middle class my whole life. I have not had many experiences outside that. And so like it also can put you literally in a role that then maybe you're experiencing something else through the eyes of like somebody you're not. And I think that can be great. And from the flip side of that, it can put you into a role that maybe you already fulfill, but you know, you're a wizard now. And so like you can do different things than you can do as a not wizard, which is unfortunately what we all are in real life. Sage, what do you think? Like what is the benefit of tackling these issues?
The reason when I really started to very consciously incorporate it into the games that I've run is because I felt that the games that I was playing in, the games that I had run in the past, I felt like they fell flat. Like there was like no real dimension to the storyline. You know, I got easily bored of the traditional fantasy narrative of like you're going around as a party of adventurers and you're going from quest to quest to quest, and you're like, if I wanted to do that, like we'd all just play video games together. But like we're here and we have this very real opportunity to co-create a world that is dense and has nuance and, you know, has so many layers to it. And I think that's what makes for what really makes for a very compelling story. And I think when you accept the risks, you can get so much more out of your table.
Yeah, you get a lot more deeper story, deeper character development when you sort of tackle some real world issues. And I think it's why you're seeing in our television, like our dramas are tackling a lot of real world issues. Some of them very well, some of them not so well. Rohit, what do you think is the advantage, right? You said you're going to cons, you're playing some adults only games. Like, what do you think are some good advantages of that, of playing in a game with real world issues?
At least to me, the key of role-playing games is the role-playing part of it. And I was actually reading an interesting medical paper recently where some therapists are using RPGs to work with younger children to kind of help. I mean, roleplay is a natural part of everyday life. Whether you're a roleplay gamer or not, you're doing roleplay at some point, sometime. Whether you're going to hit on some girl or guy at a bar, whether you are just trying to do better at your job, and so you're trying to boost yourself with a little bit of confidence. You're encouraging yourself to be something that you don't think you are. And I think that role-playing games is taking that and putting a rule set on it. Instead of it just being whatever you want, all right, here are some guidelines on how you can do that. And I think that all creators influence their creations with politics, with race, with gender. Whatever you are comes out in what you make. And so when we have a role-playing game that tries to touch on something that is available in real life, we're trying to bring in our own experiences and our own culture and our own bits of ourselves to try to help other people see what we're seeing. And then the inverse, sometimes we don't know what we're missing out on. And like you said, James, if you've always been in a certain sphere, sometimes you want to see what's outside my circle. And so you try to be something else. I've never actually played a game as a former slave, for example. And I think that's something that I really should do, because I play a lot of Deadlands. And Deadlands is a great setting for that, because, yeah, you've got your magic and your mysticism, so you're removed from the real world. But at the same time, how would I behave in that setting? How would I work if I had a GM that would actually take it to the point where it would be? Because obviously, like Phil pointed out, former slaves weren't exactly walking around, strutting down the middle of the street in the late 19th century. So why should my character be able to do that as well? I think I should try that now. Like, that's a great point. I should see what that experience is. And so I think that's exactly what it is. Real life influences our real lives. So real life should be somewhere in our gaming. The question, like we're talking about here, is the balance of it.
Mm-hmm. And I think that sort of brings me to my next question, right? Is how do we do this then tastefully and artistically and in a way that makes people think, as opposed to just being super duper offensive, or even just a little bit offensive, right? And I think that is another fine line that you're walking, where it's like, man, this could be really cool and compelling and really fit my horror game, or like, okay, now it's become a weird parody of itself that is distasteful. Like, how do we do that? Are there resources we can do? Like, what do we look to, and how do we make that happen?
Diversify your table. That's like one of the more important things you can do. You can have people who don't look like you, and that includes those people of color, women, whatever.
We need to have more people sitting at tables with us that don't look like us, that are different from us.
I think you're right. Having a bunch of different life experiences at the table and people who don't look like you helps keep that in check, and helps you sort of, right, Sage, you were talking about, like, monitoring your players' reactions as the GM. It helps if you don't have the same thermometer, right? It helps, like, to be like, oh, okay, look at I have all these different sort of viewpoints that I can take in while I'm doing this. Is a great suggestion. Diversifying the table is huge, and also will make you awesome lifelong friends that you may have never made otherwise. Sage, what about you? Like, how are you finding where the line between tasteful and distasteful is?
I mean, I definitely agree with Phil. Like, diversifying your table is so important, especially when, very stereotypically, the gaming industry is seen as white straight dude. And I think making a concerted and conscious effort to reach out to different people, I think, says a lot, and it goes a long way. But also, on the other hand, like, because I'm gender fluid, for me, what's been a very positive experience is I've been, I have a group of people who are all trans, and we all play together because we have a sense of solidarity and community already that allows us to find a line together. It's all about finding that balance and finding what mix of people works for you, and be really frank and honest, and like we've said so many times, be like, the green light, red light, yellow light. And for everyone, I think, to be open to accepting, like, okay, that person's uncomfortable, like, let's move on. Maybe just drop it and then talk about it later after the gaming session.
Yeah, that's very true too. Finding a community of people where you feel good. I imagine that with a group of people who are transgender, right? You probably feel more comfortable tackling those issues than I would have with my middle school group of all straight women. And it certainly probably treat every issue with more respect than we did as dumb middle schoolers. And finding that line, with your friends, I think, again, right, that point about communication, being open to knowing that, like, I'll be okay to go there if you guys bring me back when you're not comfortable being there, is that just having that relationship is A, probably one of the healthiest relationships you'll have in your life, but also B, really, really going to be great for your game because it's going to take you to some really wonderful places. Rohit, what about you? You know, we're talking a lot about your gaming group and stuff, but like, you're at the conventions, right? How do you do this with a convention game? How do you very tastefully sort of work in some of this fun stuff, some of this real world stuff?
That is tough. Like, when you have a gaming group, you evolve that line. That line is, because I think in any of these conversations, if I was having this discussion in my office, the line isn't in a fixed place. The line moves. The line isn't a line. The line is this big squiggly thing that happens to circle all around things. And so when you're with a gaming group, you find where those squiggle points are. When you're at a convention hall and you've never seen anyone at your table, you don't know anyone at your table, then maybe a line is a better way to look at it, but you have to be ready to find it and move it according to the group you're with. Because you might have a group that is more lackadaisical, is more, open-minded, fun-loving. And so if you get a little political, they're not going to really have an issue with it. On the other hand, you might have a group of people who are very conservative, and they're just not there for that. Yeah, this goes back to, it is a big onus on the GM to carefully monitor that group. I will say one thing that I'm a really big fan of is meeting other people. Challenging your preconceived notions is very difficult for all of us. No one has an easy time doing something different. Even the people that say they love going out and at the end of the day, they're doing the same thing, but in different locations. And it's tough for people to want to change. And I think a gaming convention is a great place for you to go, okay, I've never met someone who is X. Maybe I'll get that opportunity. I've gotten to meet some people who are differently abled. I've gotten to meet some people who are differently gendered, transgendered, whatever it might be. And I'm sure I'm screwing up phrasing here at some point or another, but the point is I get to learn it too, right? Like, when I come in, I don't know. And the only way I'm going to learn is just how I would learn in any other situation. It's to put myself in there and to ask and to find out. And so if I'm only ever playing with guys, for example, I'm getting a very limited view on who people are, what people are like. It's one of the reasons why I'm actually not a big fan of Indian-only events, just because to me that's like, well, I'm Indian. I know how to be Indian. What about other people too?
I get that a lot too. I get invited to a lot of black gamer functions, and it's like, I know black gamers. I are a black gamer. So I want to meet some other people. I want to hang out with some other people. I want to do some other things. I want to get their experience.
I should definitely mention one thing. So my local con group is this group called Double Exposure. It's a pretty good group, and one of the things I love that they do, they've arranged with the hotel that at least 2, if not 4 of the bathrooms there are marked with the gender signs covered saying, use the bathroom you're comfortable with. I absolutely love that. I got it. So I'll be honest. I'm not the most comfortable with it, but that is because I have those preconceived notions, right? Like, I've never been in that situation, so it's very weird for me. But if I never go into those situations, how am I ever going to get over that? No one's going to be comfortable on day one, and they do leave some gender-marked bathrooms for people that, sure, aren't comfortable with it. But it's important that everyone has that opportunity, I think. And so I've relished every opportunity I've gotten to try and meet different people. I found out where people get some of their lines from. They've had parents that were a certain way. They watch certain TV shows. They've seen certain movies. And it's important that, especially when media screws up some of those lines, that those of us that are in a position to shift those take that opportunity to move them accordingly.
I definitely agree with that. And to add on to that, I think one of my things that I do when I am a player character is like for my character, I will pick like one aspect of maybe like a particular issue or something about their personality that's maybe kind of like controversial or could possibly breach into an uncomfortable region, and I'll slowly kind of push on that and push it forward in the game and see how people respond to that and how open people are to that, and kind of see if people will interact with that and how they play with it. But to go very slowly and pick one at a time, so people can kind of know what to expect once you start doing it.
Slowly check off the boxes.
Yeah, because like in one of my characters is a fallen Azamar necromancer, and so they're totally like gender neutral. I mean, they're like an angel, like whatever. To really plan that, to really emphasize, like, no, they use gender neutral pronouns, like, and it gets interesting in flirty conversations of like, which way do they swing, and to find exactly who knows, to find different small ways to like that can really make a big impact.
It's interesting you bring up the idea of slowly bring in, because obviously from the con side you have the opposite. You don't have slowly bring in because you have 3-4 hours to knock something in. And so if you want to bring up a tough topic, one thing I would love to see cons do is have flags on RPGs, things like political, like something to indicate that, okay, this might be a heavy game, and we're seeing a lot of systems now that are designed around this concept of heavier ideas, and so I'd love to see that kind of brought more to the forelight, so that GMs could go, okay, I'm going to run a game on a political concept. We're going to talk about something relating to something happening in the Middle East. We're going to talk about this guy from 100 years ago who was a terrible person or something like that. Like I said, the idea that the creator brings their own personality in, why shouldn't we talk about those things? Yes, it's uncomfortable. Yes, it's weird. You don't know where anyone sits. But those conversations can happen when everyone's prepared for those conversations to happen. Where it sucks is when the conversation happens, but no one's expecting the conversation.
Right.
Yeah, definitely.
Right. They don't know that they're a part of something that they could get something really great out of. And that can be a problem for some people. I run board games at Dragon Con, and I think that was a great idea. I'm going to actually bring it up to both the campaign and the non-campaign RPG director. We see if we can possibly even get something like that for this year. I mean, because it's really easy to look at what the modules we're running are, and if they have that type of content, we can kind of give it a label.
You guys are so right. This is so good. I think there's all kinds of ways of approaching these things, but the biggest thing is like the people who have the power to communicate, right? Starting with, if you're at your table, your game masters should keep those lines of communication open and be open and be frank and be like, hey, we're going to get into some stuff that might be uncomfortable, but like it could also be an awesome time tonight. So like if you're uncomfortable to the point where you're not having fun anymore, let me know. Like I feel like that is so huge. And when we're talking about cons, right, it goes up to those con organizers, and it's up to them to make sure that the GMs know that they're talking about this stuff. And it really does mean you can tackle some interesting things, tell some great stories, get some different perspective, and have a blast. If you sit down at a table and somebody says that, if you want to, be open to the experience then. Say like, okay, I'm really going to monitor myself. I'm really going to be self-aware and understand that what's happening right now is we're playing a game. And understand that, it's not necessarily me, but also understanding that I have the freedom to say, hey, you know what? This isn't working for me. Can we move on, or can we, rewind, or whatever it is?
We try really hard at Dragon Con to make sure that everything we do is inclusive. Mm-hmm. And we encourage players, GMs, we encourage everybody, whatever game they're playing. If you feel uncomfortable, if you can't speak up at the table, speak up to somebody that's in charge. Mm-hmm. We love our famous rule number 7, don't be a jerk. And and it's a simple rule, and we try to do it in everything that we do. And I tell people, I've seen people who get offended by something, and immediately they want to rant, they want to lash out. And I said, I like to tell them, this is a good time. Let's talk about it. Let's have a conversation. You were offended, you didn't like what was going on. I see your point of view. Let's talk about it so it doesn't happen again. Contrary to what the news will tell you most people don't seek to be offensive, especially in this hobby. They may be trying to be edgy. Most people really aren't trying to be offensive. So communication is important. It's a two-way street. Taking offense at every possible slight, that turns people off as well. So I try not to encourage it. I try not to do it. But at the same time, like I said, I've been doing this at DragonCon for 30 years. I want people to be comfortable gaming at DragonCon. I want people comfortable gaming at a table I'm gaming at. Mm-hmm. And, if you're going to be a jerk, if you're going to do jerk-like things, don't be surprised if you get called out about it. And
yeah,
I'm kind of loud when I call people out about it.
Yeah, I think the whole point of conversation is so important. And anyone who's in a position of power, I mean, the four of us, we are names to some extent within whether our own small circles or large circles, whether we're podcasters, whether we're DMs, we are in positions of power, right? And if we don't use that power responsibly, I mean, Spider-Man has it best, right? We all, when you have that power, you should be using that power in a way that's beneficial for everyone. When you're at a convention, Phil, I think it's fantastic that you're so open to that conversation, because I've definitely known people who've organized things and they're not. And it becomes very difficult as a player when you have a problem with the GM and then you want to talk to someone who can do something about it, but they're not ready to hear that. And so when you can do something, do something. And when you can't do something, it's equally important to figure out why and try to find a solution. Because you're not always going to be in a position where you'll be able to change something. You're going to find players who are not open to discussion, who are not ready to have that conversation. Everyone guards themselves. The question is, how willing are they to let down that guard, even just a little bit, to open up? Mm-hmm. And if someone's not ready to open up, don't try to force it. Let it go, move on. Everyone's there to have a good time. If they're willing to have a conversation after the table, hey, go for it. But don't force things on people.
Right.
Definitely.
Sometimes you got to agree to disagree.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, very true. And then, like, okay, we're just going to stay away from this. We're not going to talk about this topic when you and I game together. There's a whole world of other things we can game about.
Yeah, exactly.
Which I think is great. We're running a little short on time here, but Sage, I want to turn to you. This was your topic that you brought forth, and it is an awesome one. Do you have any final thoughts before we do the whole outro thing?
Yeah, so I'm very glad that we got to do this, because it's something that's so important to me, and I love seeing games become more complex and multifaceted as time goes on. I think that's really powerful, and I think there are a lot of people out there who want to go there but don't know how. And it's amazing, on Twitter and Reddit, everything, to have a community of people who can share their experiences and offer tips. I think that the X on an index card is amazing. Like, I've never heard of that, but now I'm going to have that at every game. Like,
yeah, it's super. I did not know about it either until...
it's super effective.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think for everyone at a table, I think really the most important key to any role-playing experience, no matter what the theme of your game is just having awareness.
Well, I think that is going to do it for this episode of Tabletop Babble. But before we go, Sage, where can people find you?
You can find me on the Twitters. My name is @StaffOfSage. You can also find me on Facebook, Sage Stafford, as well as Staff of Sage on Instagram. Yes, for all of your nerdy and social justice needs. I'm also a huge Magic the Gathering nerd, so
what?
Yeah.
And you can also, of course, find her over at Don'tSplitThePodcastNetwork.com, where we have lots of awesome Adventure Maiden stuff there.
Yes, and our Patreon page for our Adventure Maidens, where you can get all kinds of cool bonus content for only $1 a month.
Awesome. And as of this recording, we've got about an hour before I'll be watching you all on Twitch, so I'm excited.
Indeed.
And Phil, where can people find you?
You can find me at DragonCon September 1st to September 4th, 2017. It's in Atlanta, Georgia. I'm all reaches at DC Board Games. at DC Board Games on Twitter, or some dark alley. You know.
You just call his name 3 times, he'll appear. Walk out of the shadows. And Rohit, where can people find you?
Gamersplane.com. It's the website I run, and you can find me on Twitter at Gamersplane, Facebook, the page is Gamersplane. Pretty much Gamersplane seems to just run everywhere. And you can find me on a bunch of other people's podcasts, because apparently that's what I do as well. So that. And if you don't mind, I'm going to give a quick plug for Lawful Good Gaming, too.
Please do.
You know, we're trying to get people to play games and maybe raise some funds for some cool groups. Right now, we're doing Nature Conservancy. I think by the time this podcast comes out, that should still be the charities we're supporting. And so who doesn't love nature? So,
That's
you know,
great.
it's a fun way to either online or with your friends play a game and, you know, feel good about doing it, too.
That's awesome.
And you can find that at Lawful Good Gaming on Facebook and on Twitter.
Thank you all so much for joining me on Tabletop Babble today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That was a great discussion. I really, really enjoyed talking with everybody. Thank you so much to all of you out there for listening. I really, really appreciate your support. If you like this show, there's other shows on the Don't Split the Podcast network that you might also enjoy. We've got a great actual play podcast called Venture Maidens, another great actual play podcast called Dames and Dragons. We've got a radio play in the fantasy world of Have Spellbook Will Travel. We've got Rudy Basso and Alex Basso talking about video games over at Game O'Clock. We got the DM's Deep Dive with Mike Shea, and we've got DSPN Presents. It is a sort of one-shot series where, you know, each month we play a different game. We try to get the creators on if we can, and we have a lot of fun. We'll also be putting panels and other things like that up there, so check out DSPN Presents. If you want to find me on Twitter, I'm at James Introcaso, or you can check out my blog, worldbuilderblog.me. Alright everybody, Tabletop Babble is a show on the Don't Split the Podcast network. Thanks to Rudy Basso for founding it with me. Our theme music, which you're listening to right now, was provided by Battle Bards. Remember, RPGs are like sex. Hey everybody, James Introcaso here, co-creator of the Don't Split the Podcast network with Rudy Basso, and I am so excited to tell you about our new podcast, DSPN Presents. DSPN Presents is one-shot actual plays, panels from conventions that we attend, pilots for new podcasts, and so much more. It's basically whatever we thought was a good idea to turn into a podcast that didn't fit on one of the other podcasts in the network. So I would love for you to check out DSPN Presents. There's some awesome actual play content that is up there right now. Go check it out wherever podcasts are sold or at don'tsplitthepodcastnetwork.com.